Hi everyone, it's lovely to be here. So I've been given the task of taking on the challenge of something that's so new that a year ago I barely knew it existed, and native advertising is the phrase that's come to be associated with it. We're going to kick off with one of Teresa's little survey polls. So remember the URL you all saved earlier? If you'd like to look this up, we've got a couple of questions that will help me assess whether or not you guys know about this topic, what you know about it, and give me some clues about what I should be talking about. So the first question is, do you know what native advertising is? And pop your answers in. So Teresa's going to show me the results as they're coming in.
So 75% other, 25% marketers.
There we go, lots of people. I want to know what all you others are. Fantastic. I should have been a little bit more specific. So pretty even split between marketers and others, a few developers, and a couple of designers. Cool, let's shift on to the second question, which is about native advertising. So at the moment, the dominant answer is we're not sure what we're talking about, which is fine, because that's where I was not very long ago. And question 3 is about content marketing. And here we go. Most people now have used it, or no, heard about it. Pretty much even split between people who've heard about it and people who've used it. So 50% have heard about it and 40% have used it. Thank you. It's fun, isn't it, doing these little quizzes? Unlike Teresa, I'm afraid I haven't bought a prize for the people who answered it fast enough. Let's kick off by looking at what on earth it is that we're here to talk about. I looked this up on Wikipedia, I will confess. But reading that, it reminds me of a cartoon by a man called Hugh MacLeod, who I have an enormous amount of respect and time for. He blogs as Gaping Void, if you're interested, and he runs a business which is called Cartoons Drawn on the Back of Business Cards, so you can guess what it's about. And he has a cartoon that says, if you talk to people the way advertising talk to people, they'd punch you in the face. And I like this so much, I've got it on the back of my business cards. If anyone wants one, come up afterwards and I'll give it to you. But why on earth would we want to advertise, potentially getting punched in the face, in a way that gains attention in someone's media stream? The short answer is because banner advertising is failing. People who advertise on the internet are finding it harder and harder to get us to click on their adverts. So they're being creative about new ways to advertise to us. When did native start? About a year ago. In fact, almost exactly a year ago. And content marketing, off which native advertising is based, is possibly a little bit older. About 2005 was, I think, when the phrase was first launched. So I'll start by talking about what native advertising is not. It is not fake product reviews, and we've all heard nicely bad, horrendous stories about that. It's not product shots. It's not special offers or pricing. It's not press releases. It's something completely different. And I'm going to explain what it is by telling you about my very first encounter with it. I'm an avid reader of the British newspaper called The Guardian. And I was reading an article that had an interesting headline. It was talking about the management style of a football manager of a German soccer club. And I don't actually like football particularly. I'm not a massive football fan. I don't normally browse the sports pages of the website. But it was about his management style. It's about he'd worked with this club when they were in the second division, and what he'd done with the players and the team, and how he'd managed to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, and how they'd gone into the first division, and now they were challenging the top club, which I think is Bayern Munich, for the playoffs of the entire German football league. You go, well, that's a pretty big success story. What are these guys doing that's so different? And it was a good story, and I commend it to you. But the thing that surprised me was when I got to the end of the article, an italic script across the bottom of the page were the words, Borussia Dortmund, which is the name of the club, and Jurgen Klopp are proud to wear Puma. Now, Puma, a sports brand, hadn't even been mentioned in the article. And for me, it was just a massive mental disconnect between an article that I found engaging enough to want to read it and overcome my potential dislike of football, and then to get to the end and find that it actually had been paid for and placed by a media agency, not by a journalist. And that brought me up short. So what's the context in which native advertising is happening? This is these three words. Has anyone not heard of these three in conjunction? No? Paid media advertising. Been doing it for years, hundreds and hundreds of years. It's been out there for ages, and brands continue to pay to put their message in front of us in all sorts of different places. Owned media is when the branding message goes into places that the brand controls. So that might be your company newsletter, it might be your website. It's places where you are effectively the editor of what goes out and you decide what is said. And earned media is the newest component and is about where we, the general public, take what you've written and choose to share it or talk about it ourselves. And so obviously that is the most powerful of the three because it's apparently spontaneous by the people, just as the previous presenter was describing. Now, the attention economy is here. We're all very, very short of time. We're all having more and more stuff thrown at us from all sorts of different directions. And yet, why is it that we are prepared to share things, this earned media? What is it about the content that we're reading that makes us think, that's interesting, I'll tell my friends about it? In the old days, I have a very, very lovely grandfather who used to clip newspaper articles and put them in an envelope with a handwritten, with a fountain pen covering letter, explaining to me that he thought this was a very interesting article and he thought I should read it. Now, it kept him busy in his retirement years and it was very, very nice to get. But effectively what he was doing then is exactly what we do every time we share something to our Facebook followers. So what are the formats that native advertising takes? They could be videos, they could be images, it could be articles, written in a journalistic style, it could be music, it could be newspaper things, it could be promoted tweets, Facebook posts that get promoted. I even saw the New York Times had a live conference video stream as a native placement by the conference organizer into their newspaper, promoted. And LinkedIn also now does promoted articles. So all of these things you've probably seen, and they qualify as being native advertising. Here's an example. This is my LinkedIn homepage, and LinkedIn is now trying to become a media organization. They are incredibly profitable. So that LinkedIn Today bit is where it is aggregating content from my contacts with other stuff that it pushes in there from people that it thinks I should be following. In this case, Steve Ballmer. Actually, I'm not interested in that, but that's them not knowing me. Here's my Twitter stream from a couple of days ago. And you see the second one down says New Zealand's Got Talent. I live in New Zealand. It's promoted to support the TV show. My favourite newspaper of the moment. And as I said, they've been doing sponsored adverts inside editorial for a while. So what are the trends that have enabled native to start? The first thing is interesting content. We've always known about interesting content, my grandfather being a great example. But the point now is that the interesting content's not necessarily news. Newspapers have always had features as part of their overall spreads, and magazines tend to be more features orientated. But actually, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there that's neither news nor features, nor even necessarily current, if you think of the word current affairs. The second thing is sharing. 2004, Facebook started. I didn't join it till 2007. Twitter started in 2006, a little bit quicker off the mark. I was joining it by 2007. All of us have learned a completely new habit since those early years, and that's sharing. We all do it all the time. We look for the share this button on different websites that we visit, and then we actively click it and put it into our Facebook stream, into our Twitter stream. We move it on to G+ or LinkedIn. That's completely new. It's a new social habit that we've all acquired, and which, of course, the newspaper industry is now latching onto. And the third trend is owning an audience. I used to work for an American called Don Peppers, and he and Martha Rogers started a business whose URL was one-to-one.com. And they coined the phrase one-to-one marketing and were leaders in the thinking behind CRM when that was happening in the early mid-90s. And Don always said, if you own the audience, you've got a business. And at the time, Tesco's, a very large British supermarket chain, were just beginning to sort of move out of selling food and drink, which is what supermarkets tended to sell, and moving into selling other things. They put pharmacies in store. They started adding clothing and footwear to their range. And he said, if Tesco's decided to sell motor vehicles, would you buy one? It was a really interesting question because they just opened a bank and started doing financial services. And you think, well, these are people that, we used to look at to buy our tomatoes and meat. And now their brand is going on to more and more different products and services. And so the brand values are carrying over, obviously, into the context of financial services and potentially motor vehicles, which actually they've never done. But it was a very good sort of acid test question. You thought, well, I know what Tesco stands for in the context of my grocery shopping. Would I trust them with a completely different retail purchase environment? But Tesco's owns an enormous audience. They started one of the biggest loyalty card programs, the most influential programs in the UK. They know a lot about me and my shopping habits. They can infer a lot from other data. They can probably guess which of their millions of customers are potential car purchasers. And then they take a slice of the action by trying to sell things to me. Very, very smart. They own the audience. They then have the potential to start a business. So we are all now looking, if we're content producers, to own our audiences. Our audiences are readers. They want shareable content. There's a website called BuzzFeed. 75% of their readers come apparently with the intention of finding something to share. That's amazing. Basically, we're all happy to read interesting stuff. And anyone here has done it. The nice thing, though, that underpins it, and I'll come back to this later, is that editorial journalists and native content writers or content creators basically have the same mindset. And that's one of the very important things that underpins these trends and why native advertising is happening. Let's take a look at BuzzFeed. Has anyone here heard of BuzzFeed? Yeah, good show of hands. So it's an interesting site. Okay, 20 Cats Who Deeply Resent Their Halloween Costumes is apparently 50% of the blogs in the world are all about cats, but that's the sort of stuff that some people find interesting. As I said, it's neither newsworthy nor particularly current. But then if you look at the right-hand side, texting, there's lots of stuff about hip-hop, big stories. These are all completely new properties put onto a website that didn't even exist a couple of years ago. Who's heard of Upworthy? Upworthy, fantastic website, claims to be all about positive news, saying that news journalism is all about negativity and the bad things out there. I think it's quite an interesting concept. The man who founded it is called Peter Coachley, and he was interviewed for Forbes, and he said, most media companies, when they're trying to decide about the quality of their content, they hire an editor that they really trust their judgment. Here, it's like, let's build a tool. It just shows our very different mindset of building a virality machine. A virality machine. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create a place where content aggregates and from which people take and share it into other places. At best, a website like Upworthy, has stuff that's, either awesome or meaningful. But that's not a good enough measure. Upworthy claims that everything they've got on their site has a bit of both. So they try to cover classical news as well as cats, obviously Halloween costumes. They want a perfect article for them is both sensational and substantial. It's entertaining and enlightening. It's both shocking and significant. And for me, that feels like a cross between the News of the World, sort of low tabloid journalism, and The Economist. And I can't see how it can work, but it does. Labelling is probably the most important, most contentious part of native advertising. It's all about how the news broadcaster shows me, the reader, that this is not journalism. There have been some interesting debates. Did anyone hear about the Scientology church debacle? They put a native ad onto a website called The Atlantic. It was an article all about the leader, and The Atlantic chose to be discreet about labelling it as being paid for content. There was howls of outrage, as only Americans can do, and they ended up apologising and relabelling it. But it served to illustrate the fact that we have to be quite careful. Yes, consumers do want interesting stuff to read, but it's also appropriate that they should know that this has been paid for. So I've got a few examples here. This is the Huffington Post, and I've circled things in red, but you can see the brands that are putting their information out here, presented by. Contently on the top right is quite an interesting one because they're one of the new services that are coming out as if they were PR firms pushing information out. Outbrain's another. In fact, Outbrain have just opened an office in Sydney, if anyone's interested. I put their app onto my own business website a while ago just as an experiment and was rather surprised last month to see $27 deposited into my PayPal account. Oh, so somebody must have clicked on the stuff that they linked, and I know it wasn't all me because although I did a couple of little experimental clicks, I didn't really follow through with it. So TNT, I presume that's TNT, the courier company. Olive Garden, no idea who they are. BuzzFeed. FreeCreditScore.com. Obviously what they're trying to sell, but actually 15 things you threw out that are worth a fortune now sounds like, junk in the attic. Actually, that's quite interesting. NewYorker.com, a magazine, but choosing, as it were, to syndicate its content for a fee into a place where it will bump into an audience that perhaps is not a classic New Yorker reader. Mashable. I love Mashable. Mashable calls its bit brand speak, and it is very explicit. This sponsored article is part of Brand Speak, a program that gives voice to Mashable advertisers' best content. Quite interesting. Honeywell's a tech company. It's quite an interesting article, which I put a very rude comment on the bottom if you want to go and read it. LinkedIn. Mercedes-Benz pushing their stuff out through sponsored content through that homepage of LinkedIn. I'm not very interested in the 2014 E-Class, but never mind. Here's an interesting one. This was earned media. A Huffington Post columnist went to McDonald's and tried their new fish McBites and liked them and wrote out about it. Nothing wrong with that. But McDonald's then took the fact that that had happened and chose to loop it back around from earned media into paid media. They then purchased placements to amplify further the earned media, which is what this screen grab is of, that had already been done. Now that's quite interesting, and that's completely new. So how do we know we're being successful? Classically, it's about engagement. How do you measure engagement? It's about the number of clicks, shares, likes, etc., divided by the number of impressions. That's hard to get, and anyone who's into analytics, any analytics geeks out there, my favourite apps for checking and keeping track of these things, there's two. Addthis.com, which tracks shares and likes, and another one which is called TrueSocialMetrics.com, which I wholeheartedly endorse. Some very smart young men in Eastern Europe who I interviewed actually for the blog once I'd discovered they existed. And they're doing some very, very cool things, linking a lot of different social sites and aggregating all of the different metrics that come out of different sites. Interestingly, Yahoo have basically claimed that their in-stream adverts, native advertising, drive 7 times higher click-through rates than regular display ads, and also they're better targeted. So that's how you know you're doing the right thing. But let's come back to journalistic integrity. anyone who's trained as a journalist knows full well that the advertising side of a media business is always separate from the journalistic side. And there are, of course, tensions here between the two, and they are amplified because articles are being written and placed very closely alongside, almost to be confused with, editorial content. But basically the reason it's working well is because the bidding engines that now drive a lot of the banner ad placements are getting to a point where there is no incremental gain to be had. They cannot bid and place ads fast enough to follow us as we move around the web and our cookies reveal who we are and where we are. So the future of programmatically purchased ad space has got an end game. The point here is that humanly created content allows innovations and that can have an edge over a machine. Well, that's quite nice to know. I personally think we humans are quite good at these things and we want to have control over the machines. But the revenue imperative means that those lines are blurring. And what's happening is that some media properties are creating content teams that are not journalists to work in-house to help their advertisers. The first one I became aware of was a podcast I listened to where a man in America had started an agency called Speakeasy. Speakeasy was sold to the Dallas Morning Post in order to be the content creation team for the native advertising part of their audience. And basically they are now being replicated in lots of different places. Slate.com, which is one of the Atlantic stable publications, it's a news magazine, it's an extremely good one. This is how they describe their internal team. Think of us as your creative publishing partner, working with the industry's best wordsmiths, moving picture makers, story ideators, and social media wizards. We create engaging branded content from articles and events to custom applications and video that connects with digital influencers. People don't want to be sold to, they want to be shared with. They don't want to be influenced, they want to be informed and entertained. And for me, that summarizes why the native theme is being successful and why it's being latched onto by so many different publications. So, back to the original question. What is happening in the newspaper industry? Well, a couple of years ago, nobody wanted to touch newspapers. Today, in fact, yesterday, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, bought a newspaper, the Washington Post. It's one of the biggest newspapers in the USA. Why does a man who's already familiar with the online world decide he wants a newspaper? Well, this is one of the clues. He's not the only one. There's Warren Buffett, one of the world's most famous investors. He's buying newspapers. He's actually buying local newspapers. And other newspapers have gone for broke. There's a very well-known man in the newspaper industry called Justin Smith, who has worked at several different media companies. He started at The Economist in London, then he went to The Week, and then he went to The Atlantic, and he's just been hired to work for Bloomberg Media. And the reason is that he seems to have unlocked the formula that media owners can use to monetize in the digital world. He is very adamant that they need to have not just two income streams, as in, paid subscribers and advertising. They need to have multiple income streams, getting up to 10. And he lists events, ebooks, apps, whereby you might pay to read the news on an app, but you can get it for free if you can be bothered to go to the browser, and MOOCs, which are massive online open courses, which of course is a challenge to all of our universities as well. And he reckons that this is the way that the newspaper industry needs to go, and I'm sure that that's why these investors are looking at changing the investment that they're making into the media. I'm going to leave you with Justin Smith's vision for media. This is part of his welcome email to all of the staff at Bloomberg. And his vision is basically to embrace change, to lean on quality. We know that the media environment's noisy, and to try and adopt some of the Silicon Valley innovation principles that obviously were being talked about earlier this morning, and to pull them into the old world of media. take on talent, take risks, and make it work. And for me, it's basically clear that the new tools are a route forwards, but they're not the only route forwards. And I don't know, and I'm sure you don't, where it will end up. Now, if anybody would like to know the sources that I went to construct this slide deck, I've put them all on SlideShare. So it's basically the same deck, but at the end there's 4 or 5 slides with lots of URLs in. So please feel free to go and have a further browse. There's a couple of good things. There's an Edelman report about native content and the ethics behind it, and hyperlinks to some of the things like the Atlantic scandal over the Scientology church. Thank you very much.